Hi, my name is Bethany, and today I want to talk to you about prone restraints and three groups in Illinois who are dead set on continuing to use them. Before we begin, I do want to say that I do not condone you going and sending hate to anybody involved or mentioned in this video or any kind of harassment. That's really not what this is about, and please don't be going and doing that. Now, with the release of Sia's movie, we've definitely been hearing a lot of conversation around restraint and specifically prone restraint. Prone restraint is where someone is restrained but face down. That's what prone means, is to be face down. And so very rightfully so, the autistic community was quite outraged that a scene that was basically promoting prone restraint was included in that movie. But the conversation is a lot bigger than just the autism community and this movie that missed the mark. Prone restraint has been used routinely in many schools across the United States as a part of a way for schools to deal with those with disabilities. So with this video, I would like to try to explain a little bit about the situation around prone restraint, restraint in general, seclusion, and the issue that's going on in Illinois and these three groups that I'm going to tell you about and how they're fighting against some very good investigative reporting that revealed issues with the use of restraint and seclusion in schools, and they're basically throwing their weight around to be able to continue to use this on their students. So to begin, let's talk about what prone restraints are. An article by the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint describes them in this way. A prone or face down restraint begins with a takedown. Staff then turn the student onto his front and secure his arms and legs. Staff is told to avoid putting pressure on the student's back, which can inhibit breathing due to postural asphyxia, a form of asphyxia that occurs when one's position prevents them from breathing adequately. Now, unfortunately, a lot of times these prone restraints do end up with adults putting pressure on the backs of children. As you saw in the movie, it seemed okay for an adult to put their entire body weight on top of a teenager in a type of a prone restraint. This should never be done. However, it's not exactly uncommon. Now, it appears that a lot of times in schools, restraints will happen alongside seclusion or isolation. Basically, a student as a form of punishment or as a way to calm down when they are having a meltdown or other kind of physical situation, they would be sent to this room, often just like a padded small room, put in there by themselves. There's a window for someone to stand there and observe and write down everything they do. It's a whole thing. So this seclusion is actually quite traumatizing, and as you might imagine, children aren't very excited to be taken to a seclusion, isolation room, quiet room, whatever else they want to name it. And a lot of times that's going to end up with a kind of physical response. This physical response, of course, then often leads into an escalation to a restraint, whether that is a floor restraint where someone ends up in a supine position, which is their back on the floor face up, or then to a prone position, which is them face down on their stomach. It really varies by situation. However, the two tend to go hand in hand. Takedowns and restraints are not calm and precise events. A lot of the information that we are going to talk about and the discussion here is going to be centered around an investigative report done by ProPublica Illinois and the Chicago Tribune as a joint effort. Reporters went in and looked into the records on restraints and seclusions that were occurring in school systems across Illinois. This raised a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and just revealed a lot of disturbing things that were happening that no one really knew about. One incident last year in the Valley View School District southwest of Chicago began with employees taking away pencils that a boy had been using as drumsticks in class. He got upset, threw books, and was taken to a seclusion room where he stomped on a staff member's foot. He was then restrained for 15 minutes as school workers tried to hold him still, and he complained he couldn't breathe. "You're gonna get me dead," he said as he begged to be let go. So in this particular example, we see where a child is saying that they can't breathe, and yet they are still being held in restraint. The Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint points out this trauma cycle that tends to happen in classrooms or places that use this kind of seclusion or isolation and restraint system. So the restraint itself is traumatic, and trauma changes the way the brain works. Basically, it's going to kind of activate certain parts of the brain that cause someone to be hypervigilant. They believe that they're in danger a lot, and it gives them a difficult time accessing the parts of their brain that let them reason through things or be able to kind of rationally think. So basically what happens is this trauma happens, this kind of messing with how the brain works. And a lot of times this happens so frequently that there is no time for someone to cope through having been through that, let alone are there any resources to help children or people who have been in restraint and dealing with that kind of trauma. And then something happens, they might get frustrated, whatever, and then a teacher demands compliance because they're, messing with pencils or doing something disruptive to the class or just not doing what they're supposed to be doing, etc. Of course, the child gets upset, the teacher gets upset back, and it starts to escalate to a point where the child does something in some kind of acting out that gets punished via seclusion or restraint, and that adds to trauma, which affects the brain even more, and it just goes over and over and over. So clearly trauma itself and this trauma cycle is definitely a danger of restraint and seclusion in general, as well as, of course, specifically prone restraint. Now, the Crisis Prevention Institute is typically the group that is training individuals in dealing with this, basically, crisis management. They also talk about the dangers of what can happen when someone is put in restraint. Now, as much as a lot of these facilities really use restraint as if it's just a normal thing to handle problematic children with, the CPI would probably quite a bit disagree. So here are some things that they listed that would be possible things that could happen because of restraint, and this was again listed on the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraints website. Psychosocial injury, including post-traumatic stress disorder and damage to therapeutic relationships. Soft tissue injury, including injury to skin, muscles, ligaments, and tendons. Articular or bony injury, including injury to joints and bones. Respiratory restriction, including compromise to the airway, bellows mechanism, and gaseous exchange, which results in respiratory crisis or failure. Cardiovascular compromise, including compromise to the heart and the peripheral vascular system. So as this mentions, and we've already discussed, the consequences that come with restraint are pretty heavy. Restraint is never safe. Restraint should always be an absolute last resort that happens when real serious harm is imminent if restraint doesn't happen. However, we'll see throughout this video that that's really not how restraint has been being used, especially in Illinois, as been shown, but I suspect in quite a few places. Sadly, the biggest harm that restraint, especially prone restraint, can result in is death. This was the case for Max Benson, a 13-year-old autistic student who was restrained by teachers at his school for almost 2 hours. As a result of injuries sustained from that restraint, he died in the hospital the next day. So you may be tempted to think to yourself, well, yeah, that's bad, but this seclusion restraint stuff, that's only for emergencies, right? Like, it barely ever happens. It's just for like really high risk children or high risk individuals who have like serious problems, and just like when things get out of control, it's very rare, right? Not really. The investigation that ProPublica and the Chicago Tribune did really revealed a lot of issues. Now, by law in Illinois, yes, it's supposed to only be used in serious situations when there's going to be harm caused. However, just like earlier with the whole using pencils as drumsticks, how that situation escalated somehow to require restraint was quite ridiculous. It is not an isolated incident. A lot of times, no reason was even listed for why someone ended up in a seclusion room or in a restraint, and a lot of reasons were just not lawful for the use of a seclusion room or restraint. For example, one school in particular got in the habit of using isolation rooms for children to serve time, trying to use the isolation rooms like detention on steroids. Basically, they would send the children in who didn't do their homework, who were late, who did other things that might result in detention. Instead, put them in an isolation room, basically jail, because they said so. That apparently was an appropriate way to deal with that issue. Now, in Illinois, it is a requirement that there be extensive documentation of the issue. However, there is no requirement for anybody to read the documentation. The documentation, quite frankly, doesn't have to go anywhere, and no one is assigned to figuring out what happened or looking into when restraints were used, why they were used, when isolation happened, why it happened, what happened. While the records are often there, no one is looking and no one seems to care. The following are a few examples that were listed in that investigative report. On a single day in September 2018, for example, about 24 restraints at schools throughout the state began for reasons other than safety. At a program run by the School Association for Special Education in DuPage County, or SASED, employees used a seated restraint on a child who had run from staff in the hallway. He didn't start kicking until school workers held his arms, documents show. A student who refused to stay in one place was restrained in the LaGrange Area Department of Special Education program. Staff noted the child yelled and screamed during the restraint. And at Moy Elementary in the O'Fallon district near St. Louis, staff restrained a girl who was being unsafe doing handstands in the timeout room. The restraint lasted 10 minutes. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the timeout rooms, those are basically under a lot of different names. These are for basically isolating somebody. And they can be of various structures. Some of them were practically closets. Some of them were a little bit bigger. Some of them had padding. Some of them had stuff that you could actually get yourself hurt on. And they basically put the child in there, and what they're supposed to do in these situations is, if it's because of a safety issue, they put them in there. And basically they want them to cool down till the point that they're not unsafe to themselves or others. However, a lot of times what was happening was they would demand compliance. So they would have children screaming and crying for their moms, saying, "Get me out of here," banging their heads against the wall. They have nothing to do in there, and a lot of times the people over them would make stupid demands, like, you need to, sit against this wall for this many minutes, or you need to do this and that to get out. That is against the law. Yet this is commonly happening in these schools. Now, as we mentioned before, prone restraint is taught to a lot of teachers and workers in case of a safety situation, especially when you're working in areas with special needs and disabilities. This is often commonplace as well in mental health facilities. They sent one reporter in to follow the training and kind of see what is taught in these training sessions, and this is what they had to say. The seriousness with which the trainers and the participants approached the physical training has stayed with me. The trainers began by issuing some dire warnings. Restraints gone wrong can be deadly. You should never restrain a child when your emotions aren't in check. And do not deviate from the techniques being taught. The safety of the worker and the child depends on doing them correctly. That insight helped us to answer this question as we analyzed 50,000 pages of incident reports to write the project. Did the workers do what they'd been taught? In so many cases, the answer was no. The training made it clear that physical restraint should be used only in safety emergency, but we documented thousands of times when school employees restrained children for inappropriate reasons. Now, I think this perspective is very important because a lot of times we think, well, if there was just more training, if people, understood better, maybe they would handle the situation better, but they were trained. The CPI or whatever class specifically that they were taking was very, very adamant about how this can go wrong, how people can and have died from restraints going wrong, how this has to be an absolute last safety emergency measure, but thousands of incidents where that is definitely not the case. So it is not that the training is bad, it's that the workers there are not following their training, and no one is correcting the issue. Reporters found at least 30 incidents in which students said they could not breathe, yet the restraint continued. Of the 15,000 restraints analyzed by reporters, roughly 1,300 lasted 15 minutes or longer. About 260 went on for more than 30 minutes, with more than a quarter of those involving children being held face up or face down on the floor. Some children had medical conditions that made restraint unsafe for them, but school staff physically restrained them anyway, in apparent violation of state law, the investigation found. That information is even more terrifying. How many parents send their children to school who their children are considered special needs? They're disabled in some way, a lot of times cannot speak on their own behalf or communicate reliably on their own behalf. And they have told the school there, my child cannot be restrained because of medical issues, because they will literally die. You will exacerbate serious medical issues. And yet they don't even know that the school doesn't care. Instead, they put these children in restraints when medically they're required not to. So not only is it in general unsafe, but they're also ignoring medical needs that makes it even more unsafe for these specific children. A lot of times the argument is made that safety of the workers and the other children is why prone restraints or restraints in seclusion occurs. Basically, this has to happen for safety purposes. However, according to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, the data supports that the use of restraint and seclusion increases the chance of injury to teachers and staff. When you hear stories of staff being injured, it is most likely to occur when the staff is attempting to restrain a child. Anytime we have children and staff in fight or flight mode, we increase the likelihood of injuries to everyone. Long-term data from Grafton show that reducing restraint by 99% and eliminating seclusion led to decreased injuries to students and staff, cost savings, increased staff satisfaction, and decreased staff turnover. The fact of the matter is, prone restraints in general, are dangerous. They are never safe. And in fact, doing restraints increases the likelihood that a worker or a child is going to get hurt. The excuse of it being about safety is simply a lie. Now, a very, very common defense when we are discussing issues of basically abusive actions toward disabled people is the severity of someone's disability. These people are dehumanized and they are regarded as some sort of savage animal that is just looking to hurt people at the drop of a hat. And, you know, they have these workers who are just so kind, and out of the love in their heart, they deal with these savage beasts. And, you know, they only have so many tools at their disposal to handle these. And you just don't understand. You don't understand the people that we have to work with. The investigative report also noted this type of thinking through the following quote. Danforth said, "Seclusion goes unexamined because it largely affects students with disabilities. To put children in timeout rooms, you really have to believe that you're dealing with people who are deeply defective. And that's what the staff members tell each other. You can do it because of who you're doing it to." This is the same type of dehumanizing narrative that excuses eugenics. This is the same type of narrative that allowed the Judge Rotenberg Center to painfully electrically shock autistic people as a part of an ABA aversive. It's the same thing that gives organizations like Autism Speaks control of the narrative. It's this preying on the public ignorance about disabled people in order to excuse their actions and sweep them under the rug. An off the notes moment here. This really reminds me of I believe it was the Stanford prison experiment, the prison experiment that they often talk about that was clearly unethical, but how quickly they observed people taking on these roles of prisoner and guard and really believing that this was happening, that this was real to them. Where these people who were peers suddenly were antagonizing and beating down their fellow peers because they took on a role of prisoner. This weird mind shift that happens where suddenly the world is different and that all of this is okay. And this type of stuff happens. I live in a state that has not banned seclusion, isolation rooms, etc., and restraint. I've heard the type of stories that come out of mental health institutions and behavioral institutions. I've heard some other information about the use of restraint and seclusion rooms of people who aren't trained and who don't know what they're doing. And it's like it's this different world where it's okay because of who the people are. It's okay because they're not as human as you. It's okay because they're depraved. It's okay because they're not as intelligent as you. It's okay because they won't tell anybody. It's okay because your peers say it's okay. It's okay because your boss says it's okay. It's not okay. I want to provide you with information here about what's going on. But quite frankly, there's definitely a very emotional component to this for me. And I hope for you too. Because I think that's a very human reaction. When we say like, this is inhumane, this is not okay, this is abuse, you wouldn't subject yourself to that. You wouldn't subject your child to that. And once people start to be like, wow, yeah, that's really awful, there's always someone who comes in and says, well, you know, the really disabled ones, though, we can do it to them, right? You just don't understand the really disabled ones. It's somehow it's somehow humane for them. It just makes me so upset because there's always someone who comes in whose job it is to continue to abuse disabled people, who comes in and says, oh, you just don't know how horrible it is. You just don't understand the severity of their disability. We have to do this abusive thing to them, and it's okay because of who they are. It just makes me so upset. So you, just like these schools, might be wondering, well, if seclusion and restraint are banned, what are they to do? What are they to do with these children, these people who have violent outbursts? Because yes, people do. Those who have difficulty controlling their behavior, who have difficulty expressing how they're feeling or what they want to say, what are they supposed to do? The thing is that these places for themselves have learned that this is the only way to do things, and also have taught you to believe that this is the only way to handle things. However, there are actually quite a few different ways to go about dealing with people who have severe disabilities without traumatizing them. The Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint lists these as some alternatives that have been shown to be helpful. Ukeru is a trauma-informed crisis management alternative to restraint and seclusion developed by Grafton Integrated Health in Virginia. Ukeru centers on a philosophy of comfort versus control. Collaborative and Proactive Solutions, or CPS, is the non-punitive, non-adversarial, trauma-informed model of care Dr. Green originated and describes in his various books, including The Explosive Child, Lost at School, Lost and Found, and Raising Human Beings. The term low arousal was first used in 1994. McDonnell identified 4 key components considered central to low arousal approaches. These include both cognitive and behavioral elements. Restorative practices. A growing body of research shows that schools and districts that have implemented restorative strategies report a range of impressive outcomes. Trauma-informed practices. In a trauma-sensitive school, all staff shares a common understanding of trauma and its impact on students, families, and staff, and a mission to create learning environments that acknowledge and address trauma's impact on school success. One school in Virginia went from being one of the most violent schools to ending seclusion and restraint with impressive results. That school is Grafton. That's the one we mentioned earlier that uses Ukeru and also has the data on the relationship between staff and injury, as well as how that correlates with seclusion and restraint. Grafton, before they adopted this approach, had used seclusion and restraint so much and had actually ended up with so many workers having injuries, just basically a very, very unsafe environment, that they lost their workers' compensation insurance coverage. That was definitely a red flag to say, look, we have to figure out something else because this isn't working. It's getting worse. Now we don't even have insurance to cover when our workers get hurt, which they do because there's a lot of restraining happening in this situation. Of course, some of the teachers and those who were used to this kind of environment and this kind of behavior were saying, you know, if you do that, we're going to reward bad behavior. Now, where have we heard that concern before? Yes, behaviorism is very strong in the use of restraint and seclusion. This is also why there were so many reports of random demands being made for compliance before children were let out of seclusion and isolation rooms. So behaviorism runs pretty strong in these environments, and so teachers were saying if you take away the restraint and the seclusion, then you are rewarding bad behavior, which is an argument that's going on in Illinois right now. As the school was looking into some possibilities, one of their students died very close to Christmas in a prone restraint from asphyxiating on their own vomit. And that very much propelled the search for a different answer in the school. Now, thankfully, after a lot of pushback, whether it was from the staff, whether just from the concepts of dealing with something differently that everyone seems to have dealt with the same way that hasn't been working for quite a while, they did manage to succeed and are now an example school for a lot of other schools that are looking to end seclusion and restraint and find much better, safer, healthier ways of handling children and people with disabilities. Ed Nientimp, who oversees pupil services at the Mill Creek Township School District in Erie, Pennsylvania, attended a training program at Grafton 5 years ago. Initially skeptical, Nientimp was won over and led implementation of the system at Mill Creek. They eliminated restraints within 3 years at the district's public schools. I think we're 1,000 times better than we were then, he said. I think our staff is happier. Having that mindset of not yelling, not getting in somebody's face, not scaring them, threatening them, startling them, grabbing them. And what he just said there is a very real look at what happens in these situations. Because of the very physical nature of dealing with someone who is obviously in distress, who is being physical themselves, then you're trying to take them down and restrain them, and you're being physical too. A lot of times emotions run high, and it becomes a normal culture to be screaming in someone's face and threatening them and scaring them and grabbing hold of them, obviously for restraint or other purposes. And that is just toxic. It's toxic for the workers and obviously toxic and traumatic for the children and clients, whoever. I appreciate that this person said that because this is often seen. I've heard these things from places in my own state. I'm not surprised, unfortunately, that that's how it's handled. People want to say like, oh, we did all the good things and then, they were just so out of control. We had to put them over there. Like, that's not how this goes. You can't pretend that you're just like totally unemotional and it was all just fine. Like, that's not a realistic picture of what is happening in these situations. So to be able to eliminate that, it's like there's actually hope. That's what it feels like to me. Now, another hesitation a lot of times from these schools and criticisms basically are that trying to change to these methods are going to be very expensive and require more staff. Because apparently, as long as it's less expensive, it's okay to traumatize disabled children. In one of the articles between ProPublica and the Chicago Tribune, they pointed out information that I was pleased to see. This is just practical. Let's think about this for a minute. So people were saying, it's going to cost us more. It's going to cost, having someone to take a child out and, go swing on the sensory swing or whatever and then come back. That's going to take more. But what's happening in the situation of having to seclude and restrain a child? There's at least 2 people happening most of the time in taking the child out and taking them to the room. If one person is dealing with a child, there has to be, in Illinois, a second person who is basically recording everything. They're writing every single thing down. They're not involved in the mess at the moment, at least, that they're writing stuff down. Now, oftentimes, it's not going to be just one person performing a restraint, especially because they're fighting for keeping prone restraints. And some prone restraints, if not most of them, require 2 to 3 people. So now we're talking 4 staff members, at least, who are dealing with one child in a situation of restraint, prone restraint on the floor, because you have 2 people at the sides, one person at the legs, usually, and then you have your mandatory person who is recording down everything that's happening. So how is that not a terrible use of employees and money and time when you have 4 people dedicated to causing trauma in this situation, when you could just have one person take a kid out to do a sensory swing and come back? And look, to be fair, it is hard to change what you know. It is hard when this has been how things have always been. This is just what you've learned, what the people above you taught you. This is just how it is. And having to challenge that is difficult. After all, these people are steeped in behaviorism. They use behaviorism as a means to try to control these students because they really haven't grasped any better tools. And really, they are conditioned in that same way to think that this is the cycle. This is how it works. They are conditioned to do things this way. And so when you're challenging the concepts of how you treat disabled people when they've been used to screaming in people's faces and threatening them and treating them like they're just bad kids, and you're also demanding that now we actually don't treat people like they're just a set of behaviors and we're going to give them all the consequences and make them calm down the way we want them to. You're flying in the face of behaviorism. You're flying in the face of everything they've ever known. Of course, there's going to be pushback. But the fact of the matter is, as we've looked at this, it is not safe. It is not safer. It is not healthy. It has not been shown to be therapeutic or helpful in any way. And if you want more information on that particular aspect of it, feel free. I have a pretty long resource list for this particular video, project, whatever. Check those all out. We see that there was an upward trend of uses of seclusion and restraint because it's not working. It's going in a cycle and making more trauma. So we have traumatized children. We have behaviorism feeding this trauma because it's not working, but they're taught to keep doing this because this supposedly works, because finally you get a child who does what you want after you've traumatized them for an hour doing how you believe you should control them. You have people just straight up breaking the law. It is not safer for children around them, or staff. In fact, it is more dangerous. It literally has caused people to die. It causes long-term problems in other situations. It's actually more expensive because of, obviously, the health problems that could be happening, lawsuits that could be coming, the staff who might need to leave because this job is so freaking toxic. Trips to the hospital. There have been situations where they were having to call the ambulance for children that they restrained. It's just a hot mess. It's not safer. It's not cheaper. It's just bad. And to top it all off, there is a better and safer way. But you have to decide to look at disabled people like they are human beings worthy of respect just as much as you are. So now that we have established what restraints are, why they're a problem, why quite frankly there is no excuse for schools to continue to use them and refuse to try different methods, let's get into the 3 groups that have adamantly pushed back against the Illinois attempt to ban seclusion and restraint. So basically this story that was published by ProPublica Illinois and Chicago Tribune came out. Obviously, very revealing information. This moved a lot of people, as it should. It revealed a very big issue that no one before seemed to really care about, and really brought it to the public's eye, to lawmakers' attention, etc. In response to this being set out, there was an emergency ban on seclusion and prone restraint. Over time, that slowly let up because, again, schools are pushing back. They don't know what else to do. That they are conditioned to do this thing. They don't have training in any other way of treating children, human beings with disabilities. And so they're saying we need to be able to seclude and restrain. And so they're like, well, maybe, I don't know. But then they're working on this bill to pass that's saying, yeah, but we're really going to be moving toward completely eliminating this. Basically, it goes through this legislative session. It could have moved into being passed. However, the session ended before this. However, as part of being able to stall this bill, these 3 groups worked to basically help kill the bill before it could be passed in this particular session. Now, do note that there are people who are dedicated to trying to get it passed in this next legislative session, and I'm hoping to see that, and I'm going to need your help here in a little bit. But let's talk about these 3 groups who have actively worked against banning prone restraint and seclusion. Now, I do want to say that perhaps in many ways these groups could be doing good in the community. There are other ways that they might be causing positive things. But I have a very big problem with them trying to say, let's not actually ban it though. And so I'm going to call them out because they used their power, they used their influence to try to continue this disgusting and barbaric practice in their state. The first one we're going to talk about is Markland. This is a large nonprofit. It runs day schools and care centers, etc. A lot of things kind of go on, but we're kind of focused on their day schools because that's where the focus is here with disability and restraint. They decided to send a letter to the editor of the Chicago Tribune, and this is part of what it said. Well, Markland Day School Administration agrees that schools need to actively work toward reducing isolated timeouts, and physical restraint. As covered in House Bill 2263, we oppose the complete ban on prone restraints. Prone restraints have been an effective therapeutic intervention that aids in de-escalation, in calming students who pose an imminent danger to themselves, as well as staff and other students. We are concerned that if the prone restraint is fully banned, the students who require individualized support and intervention may have their rights to a free and appropriate public education altered or denied. This letter is not only laughable, but infuriating. Now, I have spent this time researching and setting this information before you. You, as an informed individual, no longer someone who is part of the ignorant public who doesn't know much about this, you informed, understanding about prone restraints. When you see this information, do you not feel like someone is just lying to your face? Because that's what's happening. When we get to the point of prone restraints, all efforts to de-escalate the situation have miserably failed. Prone restraint is the point where they're like, you know what? We can't handle you. We're going to shove you into the ground and hold you there until you stop moving. Complain about not being able to breathe? We don't care, because we want you to comply to what we say. Why? Why would anyone? It makes me so angry. I'm sorry. This makes me livid. Because it's a lie. It's an absolute bold-faced lie. And people who are ignorant to the situation are going, oh, well, this big group who works with disabled people say it's helpful and therapeutic and helps them calm down. Have you ever been pinned to the floor face down by 3 people after you have been physically manhandled several times in a room that you don't want to be in, that you have been left in before to scream and cry and be ignored? Have you experienced that? Can you imagine that with me for a second? Because I personally, thank God, have not experienced that. But I'm imagining that, and I'm really thinking the whole being pinned down by a bunch of people who ignore me until I stop moving. Yeah, that doesn't sound like it would calm me down. The insult to my intelligence, the insult to the general public's intelligence here is astounding. Restraints that can obstruct breathing, including prone restraints, are prohibited in 31 states for all children and in a handful more just for students with disabilities. Does Markland really want to assert that in 31 states, somehow all of these disabled children are being denied care? They're just being denied access to their free and equal access to education and care. Do you think that they're just having their rights violated in these 31 states because someone can't shove them into the ground and hold them there until they stop moving? You really want to go there. You really want to assert that. I swear this letter just really, it really depends on people being ignorant. If you don't know the situation, if you don't know that there are other ways, if you don't know that this is all bullcrap, people will just nod along and they're like, oh, we don't want to cause problems. We don't want to make things worse for the disabled people. What they're doing here is holding hostage very valuable resources and care. This is the same kind of technique that a lot of ABA places will do. ABA, a lot of times, they'll be like, well, you were on this wait list, you spent all this money, you're starting to see that you don't like it, but like, hold on, because, you just trust the process. It'll work. It's fine. Like, you don't want to get in the way of your child's care. And they dismiss a lot of parents' concerns this way. This is the same exact thing that's happening. They're saying, hey, you know that it took a lot to get your student in our school. You know that you can't handle them alone at home, right? Well, if they decide to ban prone restraint, we're going to send them home to you and we're not going to give them care. So probably you don't want them to ban it, right, guys? They are holding these people, their care, hostage so that people will say, well, maybe we shouldn't ban it. That's really disgusting and underhanded. It just is. Markland mobilized to convince lawmakers to keep floor restraints. There were 30, at least, employees from Markland who sent in letters that were pretty much the same, all beginning with the claim that they have performed countless safe prone restraints. Prone restraints aren't safe. Restraints just aren't safe by the nature of them. They should know that as people who are performing them. Along with Giant Steps and the AERO Special Education Cooperative, from here on out, I'm going to call them AERO. At least 101 of 149 letters advocating for keeping prone restraint were sent to the state. So there were only 48 letters that supported prone restraint that weren't specifically for sure affiliated with these 3 groups. In other news, Markland also advocates for the sub-minimum wage for disabled people. They were basically asking everyone on their Facebook to oppose a certain part of legislation that's supposed to come through that would phase that out. This sub-minimum wage basically allows employers to pay disabled people pennies on the dollar for their work. And they were also involved in a lawsuit regarding seating a non-speaking person next to a person who was known to bite, and the non-speaking person was injured, However, they were not found at fault in that incident. It was actually a different school, Giant Steps, that sent the most letters, over 60. Also, the kind of pre-written kind where you're supposed to like fix a few things and send it in, and it's a template. A lot of them didn't even change the template, so it like had the options that you're supposed to erase the other ones and say like I'm a parent of, or I'm a family member of, or a friend of, or something of. They just like left all of them in there because I guess they didn't want to bother with it. I don't know. Now, this organization actually deals exclusively with individuals who have autism as their primary diagnosis. Sylvia Smith, who is the school director at Giant Steps, isn't shy about sharing that she has frequent conversations with a representative in the Illinois House. He's actually the Republican Speaker of the Illinois House, Jim Durkin. He sits on the Giant Steps Advisory Board with 5 former lawmakers and 2 lawyers. Smith also held an open house, invited lawmakers to Giant Steps to see for themselves how wonderful restraint and seclusion was working for their autistic individuals that they had in their care. And about a dozen attended. I find it absolutely nauseating that this group uses their very interesting links to the lawmakers in Illinois to continue prone restraint and seclusion. Now, along with an advisory board full of very powerful people, Giant Steps also has, of course, sponsors, just like most schools that are private or nonprofit. 2 of those are directly affiliated with members of leadership in Giant Steps, including Molex and Navistar. So Giant Steps and Markland are not public schools. That means that we don't have access to their records regarding restraints and seclusions and stuff like that we could see in the ProPublica and Chicago Tribune investigative report. So had they reached out to them, they wouldn't have to grant their request because it's not public information, because it's not the public school. However, that is not the case for the third group that was advocating for the continued use of prone restraint and seclusion. This last group, Arrow, is actually a public school and as such ended up turning up a few times in the investigative report. Students sometimes lashed out, swearing, spitting, headbutting during the encounters. One student at the AERO Special Education Cooperative in Burbank, southwest of Chicago, was restrained last year after he dropped to the floor and began flailing his legs while being escorted to a timeout room. Taken to the floor in a prone position, he yelled and swore at a staff member, saying, "I want to punch you in the face. You." A child in a prone restraint at Arrow Special Education Cooperative, based in Burbank, coughed and said he was choking. School workers contacted a nurse by phone for advice. Arrow was named in the Government Accountability Office as one of the schools with the highest rates of physical restraints per enrolled student, or the highest rates of seclusions per enrolled student. The school used prone restraints 530 times in 15 months. Prone restraints 530 times in 15 months. As this is a public school, it's astounding to me that there hasn't been a call for further investigation into this school. Imagine having your taxpayer money going into that school. So it was these 3 schools, specifically from my understanding of the reporting, that helped to stall the bill before the session came to a close. The bill had unanimously passed the Senate on Tuesday and was on track for a concurrence vote in the House, but other measures put up for approval instead, and last-minute maneuvering by some private schools scuttled plans to call the seclusion bill for a vote. However, there are people who vow to reintroduce this legislation in this session, and hopefully it goes through. So this is where I need you. This is where these people who are being abused, quite frankly, need you. We see that these 3 schools threw their weight around and said, oh, but we really need this to happen. And they sent in all these letters and basically tried to speak over the evidence, the massive amounts of evidence put before the lawmakers and pretty much anybody who goes and reads the investigative reports that have been published. And they're trying to speak over them because they just simply can't imagine a world where they can't use face down, prone restraints and seclusion on disabled students. I need you to go to the description box, and there is a link that links you to a change.org petition. This petition is directly to some of the people who may be able to make things happen. I need you to sign and share this petition. We need to show them that we exist out here as autistic people, as the disability community, as people who just really give a crap about other human beings, that those schools can't just throw their weight around and basically silence all the people who put in so many hours and hours and hours of effort to expose this going on in schools. They can't speak over them just because they have a representative on their board or because they sent in a bunch of letters. So please look for the link in the description box, click it, sign that petition, and share it, please. This is something that I think is really important. A lot of times we get outraged, right? A lot of videos online, a lot of things are about outrage. People get upset and angry. Cool. But what is that going to do? If we don't say something, nothing changes. We want the legislators, the lawmakers in Chicago and Illinois to know that prone restraint and seclusions are not okay under any circumstance. And we can do better. Illinois can do better. And I'd also encourage you to look and see if there are similar measures in your state. Is your state, well, Illinois, or are you in a state that has banned prone restraints and seclusions, or are you in a state like mine that hasn't? Is there any effort or movement to bring awareness about this situation? Feel free to share this video to help people understand what's really going on. This is not just in Illinois. This is anywhere where this is allowed, and that's just the truth because of human nature and how people act. If this is being seen over and over and over and over in thousands of reports just in the Chicago area of Illinois, don't be foolish to think that it's not happening in your state if this is allowed. So I encourage you again to sign and share the petition. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it is long, I know it is late, but I really appreciate you being here. I appreciate you all as a community. You're amazing. And if you're interested in seeing more videos from me, typically about autism related things, sometimes a lot more lighthearted than this kind of video, you can go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I try to upload every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you to everyone who supports me here on YouTube as YouTube members, my patrons over on Patreon, and a special thank you to my Spaz tier patron, Philip Noah. On your way out, please go ahead and hit the like button if you found this useful, or if you want this to get hit in the algorithm to hopefully reach more people to help bring more awareness. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope that you're having a wonderful week, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!